session is Finding the Value, Building the Case for Digital Solutions, focused on one of the biggest challenges in digital transformation, proving impact and scaling success. You'll hear how leading manufacturers are uncovering and communicating the value of their digital initiatives, from framing ROI conversations to turning pilots into enterprise-wide wins. Joining us is Rick Ross, Senior Director of Manufacturing Technology and Automation at Generac. Moderating today's session is Scott Maddox, Global Lead of Tulip's Adoption Management Office. Please join me in welcoming Rick and Scott.
Thanks, everybody. It's great to be here. Digital transformation moves fastest when everyone is aligned. And at Generac, return on investment, or ROI, isn't just a number, it's a language. And that helps secure buy-in across sites, prioritize projects, and keep the roadmap alive. Thank you, Rick, for joining us. Before we start, Rick, please just provide a little bit of background about your company, what you do, what you manufacture, and where you use Tulip.
Sure, of course. Again, I work for Generac. Those that may not know us, one of our most popular products are our home standby generators. That's certainly one of our, what most people recognize us by, but we do have a pretty full line of industrial and commercial units as well, and certainly getting into the large units, that are supporting all the new data centers that are coming out as well. So, and we have a lot of other companies through acquisition and things like that. But typically my focus is around our manufacturing technology, as that means the systems that we're using, like Tulip, in these spaces to kind of optimize our process and ultimately bring value.
And you're at 3 sites with Tulip in full.
Yeah, we have 3 sites that we have pretty complete deployments. There's some more things in the roadmap there for each of those sites as well, but certainly some aggressive rollout plans in the next year to extend it beyond those 3.
And your Tulip journey has been several years now, so I think at this point you hit just about every major use case of Tulip in general manufacturing. But what are some of the primary use cases, just so we can set the stage for the audience?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we have a couple different business units that we've deployed it in. One of those is more of a modelized production process, like the home standby unit. So certainly focusing a lot there on quality. How can we embed quality into the process, along with production and throughput analytics and some things like that, as well as order management on a lot of the configured industrial product is pretty important. And I normally kept it to like 3 big areas, like of what to build, when to build it, and how to build it, right? So kind of keeping on the basics there. So.
Perfect. So before we dive in, I am just going to frame the discussion here and get some definitions out there. We're going to talk about return on investment, or ROI. We're going to say the letters ROI ad nauseum, and I apologize in advance. What we're really talking about is a financial metric that quite literally allows you to quantify the degree to which the payoff of an investment is larger than the investment itself for a given period of time. You guys may be used to, in your organizations, that financial metric, that North Star of business cases, being something else. It might be internal rate of return, it might be payback period. Everything about Rick's journey holds up, even if you use a different 3-letter acronym to justify your business cases. So stick with us, but we're going to use ROI for today's purposes. Just know they're all going to translate neatly. So Rick, why is it that, in your experience at Generac, ROI has been so important to the success of digital transformations?
I think with anything you do in business, right? Why are you doing it? What problem are you trying to solve? What is the value for that investment that you make? Whether it's a capital investment or a digital investment or whatever the case might be, is without that return, you have to ask why do I do this in the first place? So I think it's something that's not specific to digital investment. It's anything you make in business should have a ROI.
And what's your experience been in cases where you've felt strongly that something is the right decision, but you haven't quite been able to justify it with a financial payback like that?
I think a good example is when our first rollout with Tulip, the problem we were trying to solve was a very valid one. It was around component traceability. That's something that, depending on what kind of industry you're in, maybe it's regulatory. For us, it's more of a risk avoidance, right? As an original equipment manufacturer, right? We're wanting to protect ourselves against a supplier that may send us something that's non-conforming, and maybe it escapes our internal processes. So we wanted that traceability. Traceability is sort of a cost avoidance, right? Like what is the revenue for having traceability? So that was a challenging one. We had to look at other opportunities where we could kind of leverage the Tulip platform, where we could fund traceability by other means.
Yeah, yeah. And I've been working with Rick since the beginning when you guys did a proof of value project with us where we quite literally had to justify that initial batch of licenses by demonstrating the value of a couple of use cases to sort of open the purse strings at Generac. Has ROI always been a primary argument for you or a rhetorical tool for you in your career?
Not always. My first half of my career was in automotive, and that was just an expectation from your customers in that industry that you had MES type systems, right? Even before I think we called them MES, that was a requirement, from the track and trace kind of capability and those elements of that. So it has been a little bit of a mind shift to go where it was a given that you had to have this to, hey, why do we need it? Like, what is that ROI that we would achieve from this investment?
Yeah, yeah. I can imagine that transition being, clunky, but it seems like something you've navigated quite well. How did, to start with your Generac journey, what role did ROI play in those initial stages of your roadmap at Generac with Tulip? How did it inform where you started, what use cases you started with, how you built that initial roadmap?
I think that's where, kind of going back to the original driver, was around traceability and then really digging in and understanding where the additional value could be. And that took some time. I mean, it took a few pitches that kind of fell flat because because I was also new to the organization at the time. But as I learned the business, understanding what our true opportunities are, and well, hey, if we embed this quality step, into the process, then maybe we no longer need to have that quality tech that's doing this audit every unit or every day, so that labor could be used somewhere else. So I think understanding the business well enough to I think we probably know in general the problems we want to solve and what the value could be. I've never had a lot of luck, for instance, selling MES that, hey, if we track this, we're going to get a performance improvement of 20%. I've had a lot of pushback from that in the past. I mean, it doesn't matter how many white papers or whatever else you come up with. You really have to drive it into, this is the use case, this is the problem that we solve, and if we do this, then we eliminate that cost. And then along the way, you're going to get these other things.
Yeah, yeah. And you described some of the difficulties of traceability as a use case for calculating ROI, but that is ultimately was part and parcel to where you started. Why was it that traceability was such a logical starting point in that journey?
I think at that time we had a lot of growth and a lot of activity in our plants, and being able having that traceability really solidified our process. Right, we had a lot of perceived risk just not having traceability at the time. Right, so I think that's really what drove that concern, and then again it was just being creative in a realistic way, not in a false way, but in a realistic way of what other means can we get value from the system to get that traceability tool that we so much needed.
Yeah, so traceability sort of became the backbone of the value of Tulip to you, and then you could add on from there and expand out to additional use cases. Is that
for sure
fair to say?
Yeah, traceability was the end game, but the path to get there, we had to fund it with some other functionality.
Yeah, yeah. As you went through other functionality or other use cases, was your philosophy more about finding quick wins, tackling the largest potential returns? How did you use value to prioritize where you went next, sort of each successive building block?
What I really wanted to show was the versatility or the agile nature of Tulip. So we did go after a lot of quick wins. One story that I tell is that we had, and we didn't. I don't think I mentioned this anybody else earlier, but we had an idea that drove value that from the ideation to the implementation was like somewhere between 5 and 10 days. If that was more of a traditional system, more of a traditional architecture, that would have probably been 5 to 10 months. But something that was from an idea during a pilot or proof of concept, we put in a piece of functionality that actually brought dollars to the organization.
So it was as much about the time to that value was often weighted equally to or greater than the actual ultimate value you got in the long run.
For sure. I mean, the realization of the value was critical. If we implemented something that that was a 12 or 18-month lead time, we very likely could have, changed gears. Like business is dynamic, right? If you have to deliver something and prove that you can deliver something, pretty rapidly, but with quality. So that was certainly a concern. I mean, and like in the past, right? I've had those experiences before when you had a system that wasn't as agile. In a previous role, we spent a year, 18 months, and $1 million developing something, and then when it comes time to deploy it, leadership changes, and maybe we don't need that anymore. And so you feel like that's not a good place to be, and that's really what drove me from someone that probably didn't look at Tulip as a likely product to use, because I was always that traditional MES, guy. That what's the term, like monolithic, system approach. But then I saw firsthand the value of Tulip versus that approach.
And you mentioned some of the pushback you get when you talk about different improvements of technology can bring. Did stacking up some of those quick wins help build trust that, hey, the returns we're going to see, the returns that we talk about are trustworthy? We're not making up these numbers. You've got a few under your belt.
It certainly did. Because at the end of a proof of concept, for us, we put together those results, financial and other, that whatever you achieved, and then there's that conversation with leadership, and in some cases, you're really hoping it gets approved, right? But I had some pretty good confidence, because not only when you go into that conversation, hey, I met the objective, but I also did more, and I think going into that knowing that you've almost stack the deck in your favor, that you accomplish more than you set out to do, is a really good feeling in that conversation to have.
Yeah. And you mentioned you're at 3 sites, plans to go farther than that. How has this discussion or the framing of this, ultimately this quantitative analysis, varied site by site?
Once you get past the pilot, for us, it's pretty easy to replicate to the additional plants, because in this one case, we have 2 plants that are sister plants in a very similar process, and that was our first 2 sites. So we deploy this into a proof of concept or on a proof of value on the first line, and then the other 5 lines is kind of a replication. So that's kind of part of that business case that you look for approval from leadership. But then I guess our last plant that we launched was in the industrial business unit, and it was a lot easier. I mean, because we've proven that the tool worked, that Tulip was the right fit for Generac, and it was a complete different use case, like I said. But because we'd already validated that the tool can develop and my team can deliver, then it was a 1-page business case.
That's great. And as you've gone plant to plant, or generally worked your way through Generac and making this successful argument over and over again, who are some of the stakeholders you've had to bring in to help with the either calculation or verification of these business cases? Finance teams, quality teams, operations teams?
For the first project, we heavily relied on quality, because that's really what we recognized as the biggest opportunity. So the quality managers in the sites and the pilot sites were really a key to understanding or unlocking that value, because, hey, if I had this tool, then I can maybe inspect this other area more thoroughly, or reallocate my quality technicians or something like that. When it comes to the other locations, it was more around really the business unit leadership, right? I mean, because they're seeing the value that it's performing, or that's adding to like the consumer product or the consumer power business and the industrial power. They wanted a piece of that momentum, right?
Sure.
And really showing them hey, I know you guys are different, you have your own use case, but this is what we can still do for you.
Yeah.
So I think it was a different audience because we'd already approved the value.
Yeah, yeah. So to get into a little bit farther downstream in your story of how you use ROI or these business cases in your day-to-day story, how do you tailor your discussions around these business cases or this ROI value? How do you tailor that to different audiences as you communicate throughout Tulip on these, throughout Generac on these Tulip projects?
To be honest, I try to keep the message pretty much the same. I mean, if I'm working with operators, I obviously want my team to understand what makes their job easier. What can we add that really enriches your experience as an operator on the production floor. But when it comes to leadership, whether it's plant leadership or executive leadership, I try to keep the same message of this is the value that it brings, and this is maybe our process today, and this will be our process tomorrow if we can use digital tools to solve these problems, and these are like the cost savings associated with that. So a very consistent message, but certainly have to look at it from the operator's perspective. Are we doing anything that makes their life anything but easier?
Right. And when you have that operator level discussion, do you find that their perception of the qualitative value of Tulip matches your perception of the quantitative value? Or are you saying, I saved $1, but they're saying my life is the same,
I think most cases, there's always exceptions, but most cases I've had very good feedback from operators. Actually, there's some, I think in one of the keynote conversations today there was that expectations of digital in manufacturing, and I've had feedback that when we maybe have new operators and they come in from an orientation process, and maybe they're on a part of the assembly process or a different line that doesn't have Tulip yet, they're that, well, why can't I work over there with that has that system? Certainly see the value from their perspective, and I think it really the feedback is it shows well, right? Because we're all trying to compete for a very limited workforce, I feel like, and again, a lot of that workforce today is expecting digital tools.
Yeah.
And it sort of, the intent is not only can we improve our process, but how does that help us become like an employer of choice?
Yeah, which is, that operator agreement is sort of the ultimate validation of the business case itself. Finance team can stamp it, you can stamp it, quality can stamp it, but if operators don't feel it, it's hard to justify there.
Yeah, one case I'll mention really quick is that sometimes you're surprised on what their value can be, or what the value can mean to an operator. We had a process that was very paper, driven before, paper travelers, traditional, manufacturing. Like, here's the stack of papers, go build this. One of the simplest things was simply a bill of material lookup that somebody can search. Like what starter or what wire harness does this generator get, and being able to just search wire harness and see the part in the bin and where to go find it, versus having to look in the paper for the highlighted and the circled and underlined, part that was calling that out. So that's something that we just built in because it was natural for us to build in a search component of that.
Yeah.
But that's one of the first feedbacks that we got, was something we didn't even intend it to add value did.
Sure. And yeah, and what you're getting at here in this series of answers is really what appears to me to be more of qualitative cultural value. There's a cultural groundswell of this is good, this is helpful, this is alleviating pain points, whether I can put a dollar amount to them or not. The other example of this that we see with our customers is around safety, right? Something like safety, we can see how Tulip might improve or decrease the risk of a safety incident in a given area. Really hard to put a dollar number next to the value of that, right? In cases like this, have you found that you're supplementing ROI, the hard numbers of your business case, with more qualitative supporting evidence, anecdotes from the floor, feedback, impressions?
100%.
Yeah.
I think that ROI gets the tool in place, but then I guess being a platform, having that platform approach, there's not a real limit of those extra things that you can do. And I think a lot of times what we've learned, and I think is pretty natural, is that you put the tool in to solve that business problem, but sometimes the adoption of that tool really depends on some of those quick wins from the operator. So if it becomes, I think that's maybe as you cross the border between this drives the dollar value to the organization, but then there's these other things we can do that make the operator's life easier and makes them more willing to use the tool.
Yeah, and striking that balance seems really important to not overemphasize it has to be in dollars, not overemphasize it has to be in how people feel and how people culturally relate to this technology, but striking that balance seems critical. You mentioned in some of our discussions leading up to this talk, the idea of a proof of concept death cycle, which is a term I really like. How have we did, I believe, 2 proof of value projects with you, and then you quickly got out of that and advanced beyond that and have made tremendous progress in your journey with Tulip. How did you largely avoid that proof of concept death cycle, or what advice would you have for others to avoid that?
I think we were stuck there longer than I wish we would have been. But I think really some of it's lessons learned, and some of we kind of hit this right a little bit, and then we missed it, and I guess that's why it's lessons learned. But keeping the scope clean and crisp. Again, being a platform, you can easily chase a lot of different ideas along the way, because that's one of the things that we even struggle with now. It's hard to say no when someone asks, "Can you do this?" or "Can you build this in Tulip?" It's hard to say no. It's just many times it's just the time to build it. And I think keeping that message or that the pilot scope, really clean, and saying, "Guys, it's a great idea. Let's put that in the hopper, and after this pilot, let's talk about that." It is probably both a lessons learned and a recommendation to go forward and to avoid that.
You're talking to a project manager, so a clean scope is what gets me out of bed in the morning. This is music to my ears. I think, as I recall, our journey together in those early days, you also did a good job of using financial value to get out of that cycle, to say, this was successful. We have cleared the hurdle, and we don't have to continue to beat ourselves up over trying out more use cases, trying out more things in Tulip. Is my recollection fair on that? And that was a key to get out of that?
It certainly was, because you got to transition from that, that proof of concept or proof of value into more of that production model, and part of that conversation was, we've met the goal, and these are all good ideas, but if we can't extend, or if we can't get out of this cycle, then the rest of the business doesn't get the value. So to drive that value or that ROI, let's come back to those things, because we need to it's time to scale.
Yeah, and you're delaying that time to value by the definition of the POV or the POC project.
Exactly.
What advice, you mentioned simplified or clean, crisp scope. What other advice would you have for a customer who's in that evaluative proof of value, proof of concept phase, about how to go through it wisely, but make sure you don't get mired in it?
Well, that's challenging, right? I think it's understanding who your customer is. I think if you don't have, like anything, the scope's important, but if you have, if it's unclear who the customer, who the executive sponsor is, who you're really trying to get approval from, or I think it helps that too. If you, again, the concept is, or if you have a senior director of quality that wants traceability, then hey, let's go after traceability, and he doesn't really care as much about the other hurdles you go through to get them traceability. So you have to understand what he's looking for to kind of give his approval for that. Then you have to understand a little bit more about what the manufacturing leadership is looking for when it comes to the cost saving side of things. So I think understanding who your customer is or business partner is key in that.
Yeah, understanding sort of the judge and the jury that will hear your case.
Exactly. When you're in the room looking for everyone, the way we're structured is it goes pretty high up the chain to approve like a piece of technology for the first time, and that guy normally looks around the room. He wants to see everyone's heads nodding, right? And so you have to make sure that you got enough head nodding in the room to get to that next level.
Yeah. All right, so we're going to keep walking through sort of this hypothetical journey, reflecting on your journey with Tulip. So at this stage, you're out of that POV cycle. You've proven value for at least a small scope, and you're starting to scale. You've made a decision to go with Tulip. You're starting to scale and think about that scale. How did you translate that proof of value experience into a longer-term roadmap once you were through that initial hurdle?
Good question. I think we're still refining and navigating that roadmap, and I think that's the challenge, right? Is we've had a hard time even like shutting projects down, because there's always more things that we want to do, so we end up adding more team members and kind of going after the next one. I don't feel like yet that we've even like left one behind yet and moved on. But yeah, I think from a pilot and to a roadmap, I think it's calling out those key functionalities that you want to add that add value, because you have a lot more flexibility once you have the tool in place and the ROI is there. Then you're able to focus on all of these other things that we've mentioned that maybe brings value to the operators, or maybe the next site. Because it's like I mentioned, when we went from 2 of our consumer power sites into industrial, we knew we were launching a plant. Everyone knew that we wanted Tulip in that plant as part of our digital system there, and so it was a pretty easy win, I guess, from that perspective. So I think as you scale and go to different, as you build your roadmap out, you still have to show the value. I mean, you don't get a free pass, but it is easier.
Yeah, and maybe just starting with the 3 sites is a way to simplify that question. What were some of the considerations in terms of where you would get value and how you would then prioritize those sites?
Yeah,
or maybe not prioritize, but sequence them chronologically on your roadmap.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. Obviously, when we did a pilot, we wanted to scale that to as many other sites that had that same template that we could reuse as much as possible. I mean, how can we continue to get the value without doing a rebuild or something along those lines? And I think that's really what drove from the one line in our Whitewater facility to the next 2 lines in that plant to the 3 lines in our Trenton, South Carolina site, was that these were pretty much the same lines, and we can re-leverage a lot of that same map build and reuse it. So the reusability or the composability component of that certainly had a big factor. And then when we looked at our industrial site in Beaver Dam, went into it knowing, hey, it's a new plant, it's a new startup, but we have other sites that would leverage the same template as well. So certainly looking at how can we reuse that was probably the big component of the roadmap.
Yeah, it conceptually makes a ton of sense. In that sort of natural evolution, the long-term vision of Tulip at the scale you're talking about and the scale you're striving for, the scale even today you're at, is that you've got this sort of connected ecosystem. Tulip is the backbone of it. It brings in other technologies, right? And these use cases aren't individual tactical solutions that you're deploying. They are interconnected, and your next use case that you may be justifying with value is more than just an isolated evaluation. It may actually add more value to use cases you already have live. Sort of creates a pretzel of logic here for you. And I guess to put it as a question that you can answer is, how do you continue to sort of revisit that roadmap looking forward and your value analysis looking either backwards and in some cases forwards as well?
Let me answer it this way. From an overall vision that I have and for our sites on the manufacturing floors is that I want one system or one single pane of glass, one cockpit, whatever word you want to use. I want one interaction with the operators on the front line. And many cases, Tulip isn't the source of that data. Maybe it's PLM data, maybe it's ERP data, maybe it's data from a work construction system or something like that, right? So extending that value is something that we're actually focused on some now. Is how do we bring in data from these other sources, these others, kind of this one source of truth concept, and bring that into the tool. So maybe it's something that's not always built and developed within Tulip, but Tulip's since we have that platform, it's the delivery to the operator.
Yeah. And so to continue down sort of this chronology here, you get to scale, you've made these priorities, you've made this roadmap, and you've begun to execute on it. And in some of these sites, as you get them sort of behind you on the roadmap, you get into a more of a continuous improvement methodology, making small iterations, sort of managing what you've got. You mentioned it's hard to end a project. Mm-hmm. At Tulip, we always like to say there's no such thing as a 100% complete Tulip app. It's always in some state of flux. How has ROI or financial business cases, how have those been helpful in you navigating that decision of when is it time to just say, let's move our resources on and get to the next big thing rather than the icing on the cake of the last thing?
I've yet to do that well, right? I don't think I've completely moved on to the next,
Sure.
Adding resources and leaving a person there to finish.
Yeah.
But one thing that we have started having the discussion around is I think even every new ad, even if you have the Tulip investment already made in the platform, at the line, at the station, et cetera, there's still internal cost to build that app. So really starting to calculate, what is the value of the business for this feature. Maybe a good example is in our Beaver Dam site, the materials and supply chain manager was looking to really extend the functionality into her team. Some have heavier materials transactions because of some things that are maybe not as visual with SAP and some stuff like that, and all great ideas, but the conversation I had with her is we need to find a closing point of the project, but let's capture the value. And if this stands at a pretty high value, let's compare that to the other opportunity cost. There would be things that with our limited app building team and resources that we can't achieve all at the same time. How does this stack? So what is the internal value of that, and how do we capture that opportunity cost of focusing on that request versus the next big project?
Yeah, so it's as much about resource management of your lean team as it is about the value that you can get on the other end.
Very much.
Yeah.
Very much so.
And when you get into this continuous improvement sort of steady state, do you find yourself using similar ROI financial analysis to justify that ongoing continuous improvement work, like you did the initial builds in Tulip, or does the set of justification, the rationale for ongoing continuous improvement change?
And there's nice to haves, that we like to find time for that don't always bring the value, but certainly if we can bake those into a release or something like that, then we'll try to do some of those. But I think it comes down to a lot of the same thought process as the initial proof of concept. And typically my go-to is like, well, what's the labor reduction that we get? What can we do faster or leaner, or what office role has more time to do something else if we can build this into an app that helps an office worker or a shop floor worker. So it's still, how do we make, what is the lean aspect of it? How can we lean our process out with a digital tool?
Yeah. My last sort of set of questions here, you mentioned the repeatability of Tulip as you went site by site. Apps you built at site 1 to oversimplify, you could largely re-leverage at site 2. You get double the benefit without double the cost of building it because you've already built it. Did you know that going into site 1 in this example? And if so, did you factor that into that initial justification, that initial ROI calculation of we'll build it once and use it twice or 3 times?
Yes and no. I mean, that was the intent on picking the pilot project, but I think there's lessons learned about, when you look at that kind of retrospectively. I mean, do we really get the voice of both sites as well as we could have? Probably not, but at least that was the goal of selecting that first proof of value, is how can we multiply that more rapidly than one specific use case inside.
So in that sense, you probably underestimated that initial ROI, not really understanding the duplicative, the redundant value you might see downstream, or still might see downstream as you go to more sites.
Very much so.
Yeah.
I think very much so.
Interesting. Great. All right, and my last question for you, what excites you most about the next step, the next stage in Generac's journey with Tulip?
It's a good one. I think continuing down the roadmap of it's our central point of use for all our operators, and really starting to get into the other areas. Again, I think I mentioned like bringing PLM data in is one that's we're through a pretty big bill of material, like BOM transformation project at Generac, and we're a big PTC wind chill house, and bringing that data in to Tulip is pretty much there on the top of mind, right? How do we extend these interactions with these other enterprise tools and basically just simplify that landscape for our frontline operators? And that's one of the things that is obviously most interested in. I do like a lot of the potential conversation that we had around AI earlier this morning. I think there's some certainly a drive that we all have to kind of, okay, what are you doing with AI? What are you doing with AI? And I think maybe Tulip has some opportunities there for us, but certainly looking at how we can expand this with other tools that we have in the enterprise, but also how can we just continue to embed quality and drive kind of towards that zero defect type of model.
Yeah. Well, we're very excited for you, excited to be on the journey with you. So thank you for your time. I want to open it up to the audience here. Questions for Rick about this journey, what he sees next? Yeah.
Thank you so much, Rick, for sharing your journey. I really like your comment about one-page business case. So my question is, you mentioned about that you have looked into several MES platforms before thinking about Tulip. What were the things that you find in Tulip that, by the way, what were those MES and what did you find in Tulip that made your decisions very easy? And secondly, what were the use cases that you deployed to start with? If you can tell us like top 2 or 3.
Yeah, for sure. In the past, I've deployed a handful of systems. I mean, I know I think every day there's a new one that's out, right? So we've been on this 2.5, maybe 3-year Tulip journey. So I've not recently looked much outside of Tulip, to be honest. But in a previous life, it was a Factory Talk Production Center, right? That was a really big Rockwell product, in the pharma space. I think it's really great, but it's not the only tool, right? And that's one of those that $1 million of development, someone changes, and then you've got something that just no one wants anymore because it's very, very custom. One other thing we looked at was, I think we looked at Plex. We looked at a lot of different solutions, and I was mentioning somebody in a conversation prior to this today is that in some cases at Generac, if I went down that path and picked a solution for that discrete one-piece flow modelized manufacturing process, it may or may not would have fit the industrial business unit that we deployed in, where it's not the same way, where every unit on the line is a different configured to order or engineered to order product. A lot more complexity that maybe one of those modelized, more discrete manufacturing tools wouldn't have accommodated very well. So then we would have potentially had multiple tools in that space. So there's some things like that maybe I wish that I could say that I had all the foresight to, hey, we want to choose a tool that can do everything, but it's really worked out that way where I think it's we've had a lot of flexibility so far at this point.
Other questions for Rick? Yeah.
So you mentioned some of the cultural cases where you have operators that might say, "Oh, I want to work over there," where you have the Tulip setup or you have those digital tools, and I don't necessarily have those. How do you, I guess, measure the ROI, if you will, on those cultural effects of implementing these tools, and how do you prioritize, I guess, which of those stations to roll out first?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I don't know the answer to that one yet. Normally the conversation is when I walk into the plant and somebody will ask me that, hey, when do I get Tulip or something? It's more of just a side conversation. Hey, our roadmap is to get it everywhere. It's coming to you soon. But yeah, I mean that's a very good point. I suppose you could probably look at employee retention and those types of metrics. That's probably harder to do sometimes with the hourly workforce because you don't always have exit interviews. Sometimes it's just they don't show up when they don't come back. So, but that is a perceived value that it does bring an operator, to have those tools available for sure. But yeah, I don't know how to capture that ROI either yet. I'd like to.
And I think that's why it's so important to balance, what you can capture financially with what you can't, but maybe you can describe anecdotally and share that story of that operator met me at the front door and asked me, when is my turn, right? It still tells a story. It may unlock investment, but it's not a dollar. It doesn't have a dollar sign next to it.
A good follow-up on that is that I had in the last business case that we did, that was the easier one-page one that we were able to do. In that, I did have the dollars that were driving it, but that was probably only about half the page, right? Because I got the dollars to justify it, but I still went through and listed out these kind of features, right? Where, hey, this is a new workforce, and they don't know our product yet. There's not the tribal knowledge. So if we give them these digital tools, then it'll increase the onboarding and they're getting up to speed. It's hard to put a dollar by that, but I did list that, right? And basically, because I know in our organization that if I put, hey, we're going to get $300,000 a year from doing this, it would be like, well, how prove it, right? What's the math for that? But I still think it's a value that even though you don't measure is part of that business case.
Everyone knows it's the right thing to do.
Yeah. I think it's important to call it out and just, hey, I don't know what that's going to bring. I'm going to carry the project with these other deliverables, but these are the other intangibles that it also will bring to us.
Hi. What kind of metrics are you pulling out of your Tulip system, KPIs or anything to kind of measure your systems?
Mostly it's around basics like OEE, effectivity, There's not necessarily anything new or it's more about the other capabilities that we're kind of bringing into the system, like the embedded quality components of that, whether it's, we have a big focus again on traceability, a lot of integration of smart tools. These are where we kind of focused on that because it's, counting parts, OEE, these, parts, like cycle times that are beyond takt time. All these type of metrics are pretty easy to do, and when we do report those and dashboard them and everything else. But to me, that's those are things you can do in maybe any system, but it's the other elements of that where I think we found the most value.
Hi, I was wondering if you could tell us what the ROI timeline was like, and has it kind of stayed the same? Has it shortened, lengthened, with kind of more experience?
That's a good question. Typically the projects are different, right? Because we're going to capture components of the capital and the operational expenses, with those, included in that ROI. So it sort of depends on the application and the site and a little bit more of the problem we're trying to solve. I don't think I've had any projects that were not less than 2 years. So.
It's a great question that we see just across Tulip customers. We see quite a bit of variability, and the closest thing I've found to trend it with is your manufacturing rate. So you guys are a very high rate line. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think you're making a residential generator a minute on one of those lines we worked with early on.
Sometimes a couple minutes, depends on the model.
Yeah, and we've got other customers that make one aircraft a year, right? And therefore, that's going to sort of set the stage, at least to how you start to set the timeline for IRR, payback period, ROI, any of these metrics. You're going to use a time scale that matches appropriately with when you realistically see that pay off in your manufacturing business.
True.
If you didn't have a team working on MES before, and I don't know that question, so maybe you can answer that first. What size of team have you created to sustain the work that you're doing, and does it pay for itself?
Yeah, really the way we got started is I had a controls engineer, right, that on the team that had a little bit of background, so that seemed like he was a good fit. So that's really how we got started. I took a controls engineer that could handle like the machine integration side and really kind of did that, from that proof of concept, just sort of like end to end, right? Because he learned the Tulip side, which is very straightforward, and then the machine side was part of what he did every day, and that really grew into. It's a really small team. It's a 3-member team right now. Our last plant was 230 workstations. We do partner with the sites that, where they have, we'll call it an SME. We're still working through that citizen developer model as I won't use Center of Excellence, right? Because we're all excellent. Is that what he said earlier today? but we do have a little bit of a centralized approach at the moment, which is probably not as sustainable as I'd like it to be. Just the likelihood of scaling a team large enough to deploy to support that, at an enterprise level and all the requests, we do need to work through that governance model a bit and how we can keep standards but still not be the bottleneck from a centralized team's approach. But started small with a controls engineer, and he was pretty effective. Last year he was here getting the Golden Shovel Award or something, so it was pretty good. Is that what Golden Shovel?
He was very
groundbreakers or something or whatever.
Rewarded as a great app builder by Tulip ourselves. So yes, stamp of approval. I think to follow up your question, as you think about expanding your Tulip team, as you expand your usage of Tulip, where do you find that labor comes from internally? Is there something that you no longer spend time doing that frees up some resources who can now join that Tulip effort? Or is it all net new labor?
From a centralized approach, it's net new. From the site SMEs, I think we do have some legacy systems that are a little bit burdensome to support. So from the site support, it's net zero add, but in our current centralized approach, there is a little bit of incremental headcount just to do it right, because we are bringing a lot of value with the tool, and I guess I've not been challenged yet. I mean, I always want more resources so you can go faster and easier and do a lot of cool stuff. But yeah, so far the value is there, and the headcount to deliver that hasn't been a big challenge right now.
And presumably this is accounted for in these ROI business cases, the ROI of your business case.
Many times, yes.
Exactly. Any other questions? All right, I see the clock is at 0. I know I'm between you and lunch, and that's a bad spot to be. Shameless plug here, tomorrow at 8:30 on the main stage in headquarters, there will be a session that I believe is called Driving Value. Kurt Black and Sean Joseph will be leading it, and it's a little bit more of a hands-on workshop talking through the mechanics of putting together some of these business cases that'll take you one step further. So if you found value, I shouldn't say value, if you liked us here, you'll like them even more tomorrow. But thank you all, and thank you, Rick, for your time. This has been great.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Bye.